Everyone, I'm going to get started just about a minute early, and that is because we have a lot to go over and a lot of questions that come up. So my name is Carol White. I'm the CEO of the New Mexico Restaurant Association. Most of you know me. We have some great guests on today. A couple of housekeeping things I want you to know is that number one, the governor called a press conference today at 3, and of course that overrides this call, but we do have 2 people watching the governor's press conference, and if anything happens that's something that the restaurant industry needs to know about prior or during this call, they will break in with breaking news about that. So you're not going to miss anything if you miss the governor's call today. And the one thing you need to know is that her conference will be recorded on her Facebook page. So you can always go back and look at that recording on her Facebook page. So today we are talking all about payroll protection program loans and your questions, because we know many of you have gotten these loans and now you need to know how to spend them in order to get forgiveness on these loans. We have a great panel today. I'm going to just name all of our panelists, and then I'll have Tom step in. Tom Hutchinson is the chair of Citizens Bank in Las Cruces. He's the owner of La Posta de Mesilla and Hacienda de Mesilla, which is a restaurant and a hotel in Mesilla, New Mexico. And he's also been a board member of the National Restaurant Association and the New Mexico Restaurant Association. So he's well versed in our industry. Jed Fanning is with Tom. He is the president and CEO of Citizens Bank of Las Cruces and has given many of these loans to folks, and he's studied this, so we're happy to have Jed here. Brad Beasley, you all will remember, is the CPA and a partner of Beasley Mitchell, who talked to us, I think, before these loans were even given out. So we really appreciate that, Brad. I think a big percentage of our members got these loans, and some of that is because of you. And then, of course, we have Antonia Roybal-Mack, our attorney at the New Mexico Restaurant Association, and a partner of Roybal-Mack, Cordova, BC, and she's been staying on top of this as well. So I'm happy to have all of you here. Tom, you said you had some opening comments.
Yeah, let me go ahead and just get started. Thanks, Carol, for arranging this, and I want to thank you again, you and your staff, for all the information over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I know I personally have found it valuable, and I know it's been a lot of hard work and scheduling challenges, but kudos to you and your staff. And then Antonia, who's been, gosh, I think she's been on one of these calls 3 or 4 times. Antonia, I want to thank you as well. You've been a really good source, and I appreciate your work. Today, I thought we would focus on the Paycheck Protection Program and some of the nuances. Brad Beasley, who was with us a couple weeks ago, kind of gave us the pre-PPP brief on how to get ready for that and fill out the application and those kind of things. Since then, Brad is changed hats, if you will. He's been involved in consultation in about 180 of these things with different clients to the tune of over $42 million. And so he'll share some of his experiences in that regard with us today. Jed, on the other hand, who's the president and CEO of Citizens Bank, Jed's team has processed over 500 PPP applications to the tune of about 50 million plus. So he's seen all kinds of industry types and different challenges associated with getting those applications approved. So having him on board with regard to how we're going to treat these loans is important today as well. Brad is fresh off a Q&A exercise this morning with the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, which he did very well. And so I've asked him to fine-tune his presentation a little bit to be more industry specific with us this afternoon. Just one qualifier before we get started. Although that Brad and Jed are what I consider part of my team and have walked me through this process, they're not a substitute for addressing or getting answers from your own accountants, your own bankers, and your own attorneys going forward. We're just going to share with you today our interpretation of what's been going on and how we're reacting to it. So Personally, let me just share this thought with you before we get started. My PPP went into effect and was funded nearly a week ago, so I'm 1 week into my 8-week period. The challenges I'm facing right now have to do with rehiring folks. 3 particular issues I'm running into. One would be there's still some angst regarding the COVID-19 and people coming back to work and making sure they're coming back to work in a safe environment. That's number one. Number two, most of my folks, and I laid off, unfortunately, about 100, 110, are very aware of what we call the enhanced unemployment package. So as I'm bringing folks back, I need to be mindful that they need to be brought back at a level that is fairly close to what they could be making sitting at home. I don't think I could put it any better. The third thing we need to be aware of is that it's becoming more apparent to us as we open up, or given the opportunity to open up, that we'll be opening up at a reduced capacity, which means that creates even more challenges for us to get to the FTE thresholds and payroll thresholds associated with the PPP loan, and of course one of the more important elements of it, and that's the forgiveness element. So those are things we're still having to sort through. We'll get some answers today as we talk with Brad and Jed. And one final note before I turn it over to Jed or Antonio, maybe you want to make some comments too. I think what we may hear from the governor today, or at least we're starting to hear in the marketplace, is a window when we might be opening up. And I don't think this is what we want to talk about today, Carol, but I think we need to schedule something regarding this subject here pretty soon, because I believe this opening period will occur for most of us during the 8-week PPP period. And that in itself will have some issues and challenges that we need to discuss and kick around. So having said that, Antonio, did you have some comments before we turn it over to Brad?
Antonia, you're muted.
There we go. I apologize for that. So, you know, the comments I have, one of the questions that we've been dealing with is, do employees have to come back? We now have some affirmative guidance from Workforce Solutions on this issue. So if there's specific questions, please put them in the chat and I will address those. But in short, if an employer has notified the employee of the ability to return to work, it has to be a bona fide offer. So the statement has to include the number of hours, the pay, and the job duties. The department's going to consider that an offer of suitable work, and it can only be refused upon a showing of good cause. And the important parts to remember about that are that the claimant, if they're receiving benefits, they may still qualify for some unemployment benefits if the amount they would receive in unemployment is different. So if there's a gap between the unemployment, the wage and the unemployment, they would receive some of those benefits still. So if the employee refuses to return to work, and then the employer determines that this is a voluntary resignation situation, then those employers need to notify the department that these employees have, in fact, voluntarily refused suitable employment. So with that, certainly I can stand, there's quite a few questions that we can talk about at the end of this. And I'll be more than happy to answer questions. And we put out a piece on how the PPP can be spent that Carol can certainly get that out to her members. And we can talk further as we go through this Zoom.
So I just want to add to that is that this is the determination that we got from the Workforce Solutions. This is available on our website, and I'll make sure that it goes out in our newsletter tomorrow. But this is, you know, this basically says that if you offer them employment, they have to take it, but they also can possibly get some of their unemployment benefits if it's more than that. So Antonia just talked about that, and I won't go into it more, but we do have this available on our website. And I'll show you where in just a moment. But Brad, go ahead.
Hey, Carol, this is Tom real quick before we have Brad jump in. You know,
Yeah.
what Antonio just shared with us is a big deal.
Yeah.
We needed clarification on that for a while. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today, Antonio. That changes some of my thinking going forward. And so before Brad gets started, Brad, why don't you jump into your share screen there and show us some of the overhead or the PowerPoints that you shared with us earlier today to kind of get started.
Yeah, be very happy to. Let me see if I can jump in here and share this screen real quick with you. So, you know, we're talking about the PPP loans, and the big thing that we talk about is that I kind of liken this to, you know, the situation where, oops, hold on, let me see here. Supposed to swap screens. Anyways, I'll just go back here. I kind of liken this back to like the movie Dr. Strangelove, right? You know, where Dr. Strangelove, or, you know, or the title is, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, right? This is what I feel about the PPP loans, is that I'm starting to stop worrying about not having all the information and just kind of falling in love with the process here, right? And so it's certainly a challenge, and we don't have all the answers. And as we'll talk about today, you know, we just don't, as of 4/22/20, we know what we know now, but it could change here in 15 minutes. It could change here in 30 minutes with more guidance. And so kind of how did we get here, right? March 27th, they passed the CARES Act, and part of the CARES Act is has this section 1102, which we talked about, the Paycheck Protection Program. It's a loan that is available to any business or nonprofit. It's got the discussion of not more than 500 employees, with the exception if you're in the NAICS code 72, which is hospitality and restaurants, then you can't have more than 500 at any one location. So that's why you guys see in the news, Potbelly Pig, Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and Shake Shack, all publicly traded companies, very large market cap companies receiving these PPP loans because of these rules. Now we've hit this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but the loan interest rate is capped at 4%. I jokingly say that we had a 50% increase in costs over the last week, because it went from 0.5% interest rate to a 1% interest rate over that time period. Some of the fees obviously are getting reimbursed by the SBA. It's non-recourse, and as Antonio had talked about, most of this will be forgiven. We've kind of beat up the calculation for this, basically with the average loan amount being the average monthly payroll times 2.5%. And there's different things that include costs. I've seen some crazy stuff in some of these calculations. I mean, I've seen people try to include every single one of their 1099 people they paid, irregardless whether it was the landscaper or it was a commission type sales person, even their CPA fees they tried to include as a 1099, which I thought was very interesting. No, that was not my firm that did that. But like I said, I thought that was funny that the people were trying. The loan uses, obviously we have chatted about these before: payroll costs, health insurance payment, interest, rent, and utilities. We'll talk about this. Antonio's got a great spreadsheet that she has circulated out that I looked at before the meeting that kind of calculates this loan forgiveness, and there's some ambiguity as you get into it. It talks about the ratio of employees retained, and then there's also the ratio of costs as well. So it's all difficult. You know, so it's the part that's really hard on this stuff is that we've seen so many different ways to do this loan. We're getting so much information from all over the place, and so a lot of it has to do with understanding that there is a difference here. Is that there's a difference in what the law says and what SBA has implemented. Okay, and there's a gap there. So those of us that function in the tax world, we know this all the time. What the IRS says to do, okay, is not the same as what the law says to do, and we kind of call that gap the lawsuit gap, where you're going to have to file a lawsuit, go to tax court, and have a judge determine whether you were right or they were right in that gap. Now, we've referred to what the SBA has done with their rules as the safe harbor. A lot of my clients don't like that because they want to be super aggressive, And I say, you can be super aggressive all the way to court, or you can follow the rules like they're trying to write it, fit your stuff into it, and be just fine. Okay, so, that's some of my thoughts. One of the last pieces is, yesterday the Senate passed their version of the bill that should get voted on hopefully tomorrow by the House. That's going to add another $310 billion to the PPP program. Personally, I feel that that's a lot of extra money thrown into the PPP, considering the size of companies that have already applied for the loans, either hitting their cap. I just don't see that many other large loans going out there, and considering that there's really a soft cap on a lot of the self-employed people, given that you have a $100,000 limit, I just don't see that much funds being used and that many companies not using that much. So that's my opening thoughts there, Tom. I know we want to get to question and answers because, like I said, gosh, we've seen some doozies with questions and stuff, and we'd love to just kind of dive right in and answer whatever questions we can.
Well, thanks, Brad. And Carol, since you've accumulated about 10 questions here from our membership, why don't we start with those first, and then we'll dive into the chat questions after that. So if you don't mind, why don't you facilitate those first questions, Carol?
Sure. And let me just ask, Antonia, you had a presentation, and I don't know if you want to do that now, or if you just want to get into questions.
I can just go through, if I can do that now, if you want me to share my screen.
I think that might be helpful, just because you may answer some questions with it.
Yeah, so my screen it's ready to share if you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So if you can see my screen. So I concur with Brad, and really what you have to do is look at what is available in the rules and how best can you try to comply with the rules. The memo that we put together is very similar to what Brad said. As lawyers, we like to get down and get into the nitty-gritty of what is a utility, okay? So what's important for you, Carol, and your members is that cash tips are the equivalent that is forgivable, and employers need to have an estimate of such tips, a good faith estimate, if they don't have a actual record of what the cash tips are. There was a question of, can you, you can pay for separation or dismissal, and you can pay for employee benefits, including retirement plans, those sort of things. Now, one of the things that I want to this is available for everybody to read at their leisure, but one of the important questions that's been coming up is what counts as utilities. So the CARES Act limits utilities to electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet access. So if you have something that you want to be novel and call a utility, that's not going to count. It also limits, it gives a definition of what a mortgage is, what our general terms are. And then it looks at costs related to health benefits. So, all these definitions, what I did was I took the rule, the same thing that Brad looked at from the SBA, looked at the CARES Act, and then looked at how the SBA has defined these terms, or if it wasn't defined specifically for the rest of us.
Antonia, real quick, how do you define transportation?
That's not in there. So I could take a deeper dive on that for you, but this was this is how the CARES Act defined those utility payments.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah. And then, an important thing we're looking at is that you have to have 75% on payroll, and you can only use 25% on other costs. That's what the rule has kind of guided us to. And then, not to take too much more time, because I definitely want to get to questions and answers, but what we're telling all of our people to do, and if you haven't got this advice, we're saying put your PPP in a separate bank account. So that way you can be very clear of how those monies are being spent, and there's not any concept under the law of commingling other monies together, especially if you received an EIDL loan, because you cannot use your EIDL and your PPP for the same purpose. So you want to the easiest way to do that is to segregate these into separate accounts. The other thing is, I did do my best analysis. Certainly Brad can help help us understand how these FTEs are, how they're going to be calculated. And I did put things into a spreadsheet because this is one big long word problem, and hopefully the spreadsheet can help divide that up. But we put some time into this, and certainly it's available there for you. But I did want to just say that the definitions, the bigger definitions are going to be in here, and will definitely stand for questions now.
So I'm going to stop sharing your screen and let everybody know that the document that you see her showing right now is the document that came today in your newsletter. So that document you already have. You also have this one, which I'm going to share right now, which is the calculation. And is this the word problem part of that calculation that you were saying, Antonia?
Yes, the top of that spreadsheet is if you haven't applied for your PPP loan, and the bottom of the spreadsheet is a little bit of how we've put together, along with some other law firms, how you can kind of track for forgiveness.
Okay, so let's get started on questions, because I know everybody has them, and I think from what I've heard, a lot of us have the same questions. So how long do full-time equivalents need to work past June 30th? If we hire enough back to restore full-time equivalents by June 30th, certainly they must need to work more than just one day. Anybody want to take that?
Hey, Brad, why don't you jump on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that from this standpoint, basically, you know, we're talking about the 8-week period that you get your loan, right? And so you have to look at, you know, based on that, on the spreadsheet and that word problem that Antonia was talking about, and she's 100% right, is that you have to look at the FTEs during that time period. Now, it is unclear that it doesn't specifically say you have to keep anybody after this time period. I think that from an argument standpoint, I can say, you know, no, once I'm done with my time period, I've got through my 8-week period, I've got everybody employed. You know, you may not have to retain them after that time period, because this is only for costs through June 30th. I think if they're not employed on July 1st, that's just, I think, part of a decision that has to get made. I mean, that's my opinion. But I think that they have to work, if during that time period, they can't just be hired for one day as an FTE. I believe the computation of the FTE is throughout that entire period that they've been working. You can't just bring them on for one day and say, yep, I got one FTE. I believe that's, you know, they need to look at the hours or be hired for that 40-hour period. Antonio, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, Carol, the way the calculations are going to work out is if the employees come back for 1 day, 1 week, you're not going to hit that 75% of the loan being spent on payroll. So
Right.
really, the loan is 2.5% of your average payroll, which means that, you know, 2.5 months. Basically, you're not going to hit that 8 week and that required 75% threshold if you don't come back sooner.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned this, but we haven't figured out how to calculate it. So how do you calculate the FTE we have working by June 30th?
FTE.
So, and I'm not sure I even understand this, except that you had to calculate your FTEs in the beginning, and now you have to spend on FTEs. So do you have to hire them all back at the beginning of the time period, or is there some time you can hit that number and have it still work towards the 75%, or is the 75% the whole time?
Yeah, my understanding is that you have from 30 days from the date which the bill was signed, which is March 27th, to get everybody back on payroll, right? And then that's when you can kind of use your FTE computation there, and I believe it's based on a 40-hour work week. And I know we had this discussion last time because the restaurant group, you guys really like that 30 because of the Obamacare rules that happened to go with that. And I think 30 is not the right answer. Our tax software, excuse me, our payroll software, company, goes through, went through and computed this for us. And this is coming from Thomson Reuters, and they use the 40-hour week. So I could have 3 employees, right? One that works 10 hours a week, one that works 20 hours a week, and another one that works 15 hours a week. And when I combine those two, that might only come up to 1 FTE, because that's only really 40 hours. Now I might have done my math wrong. I think that's 45 hours. But you know, that's the point, is that basically that was 3 bodies, 3 belly buttons, but only 1 FTE. Is that, Antonia, does that make sense to you?
So, yeah, and so there's somebody that said that he listened to a webinar today that said that 30 hours is the answer. And it may have to do with how you calculated your original 2.5 months of payroll. Is that correct? So if you calculated it with 40 hours FTE, then you would then spend it on the 40 hours full-time equivalent.
Yeah, once again, I go back to that same discussion I had last time on this, is that if you went with 30, then you take my company that has 70 people that always work 40 hours a week, and if you did it by 30, I'd have 92 employees.
Right.
And that just math doesn't make sense. So I really think that it's probably, you probably can consider everybody a full-time person if they work more than 30. And so maybe that's a computation. You say, all right, if it's more than 30, that's 1 FTE. But then if it's less than, you've got to kind of aggregate all their hours up. That would be fair, probably.
And the date you mentioned, so it was 30 days from the day this went into effect. So that was April 26th. By April 26th, you have to have your folks rehired.
I believe that's what it says. I believe that's exactly what the care law said. I'm pulling up the exact piece of it right now.
And Carol, I read that just slightly differently, and that's kind of what I put in the memo, because the difficulty is, one of the things we're looking at is the CARES Act and the how the VA rule reads. So I don't read it that it would be 30 days, because necessarily the place, but the loan origination date is what we're telling people is their trigger date. And maybe the bankers on the call might have some additional feedback on that as to loan origination date and how the bank's using that as the trigger.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Are you able to hear me, Carol?
Yeah, that's good.
I was on a call just before this that our trade group, the ICBA, had conducted, and we had SBA people on, and we posed that question. They were not able to answer it. I think it's still one of the unanswered questions. It's up for interpretation, and I've seen and heard it interpreted in different ways, but my feeling is we just don't have an answer for that yet.
Okay, so what do people do? I mean, and is it going to be up to our bankers to give us that information?
I think it is, and we are continuing to ask that question and press for guidance as soon as possible. I think part of what's happened is there's been a push, understandably, to get loans approved and funded, and this whole discussion on forgiveness and this question that we're talking about now has really kind of taken the back seat, because there was the thought that, well, that's not until the end of the 8-week period. But the case that we're trying to make with SBA and Treasury is to say we need those answers now, because that impacts what people want and need to do in terms of rehiring. And is it FTEs at the end of June, or is it FTEs through the 8-week period? So unfortunately, and I know the purpose of the call is to get answers, but as Brad and Tom have both said, and others, there's still some guidance that we're looking for, and we'll continue to press for that with SBA and Treasury. And I'm hoping now that some of the bugs have been worked out with the systems and actually getting the loans approved and funded, that some of these other questions will move to the top of their list.
Carol?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can join the discussion or not.
Yeah.
You know, I agree totally with Jed that there's been virtually no guidance on forgiveness yet. And after I've watched the guidance on the loan application rules change from what the bill actually said, especially in terms of whether you can include employee FICA and employee withholding or not. You know, that was a huge change to our advantage. So I agree. Who knows what the guidance is going to come out to? But I do know from our standpoint, the definition Brad was talking about is the FTE, whether it's 30 or 40, doesn't matter. It has to be used in the calculation and also in the forgiveness. So whether it's divided by 30 or divided by 40, you have to have the same number of total hours by June 30th paid or back working as you had during the January, February base period. So it doesn't really matter. We've even stopped using FTE numbers because it's really the total hours, no matter how you parse it. Because you're going to parse it the same way for forgiveness as you did for creating your base number.
But so here's my question, Ed. Without calculation, let's say you don't hire very many people this month, or you don't get them rehired this month, but you on June 30th, you have a full cadre. You still haven't used the money. You haven't used that money. So how do you get even, so now at June 30th, I have a full cadre
Correct.
of FTEs, but I haven't had that the full time. You're saying that as long as I have close to that on June 30th, I can be forgiven for the whole thing?
That's just one small calculation. The only calculation that matters for is whether or not your total payroll and expenses get forgiven or a percentage of them get forgiven. That's the only difference in bringing your payroll back to its original level. So it's a reduction, and if as long as I have the same number of hours paid before, and we're doing it the last payroll before June 30th, we're going to make sure we have the same number of hours paid as were paid during our base period. And as long as we do that, we get to whatever my forgiveness amount is, which is actual payroll plus actual rent plus actual utilities and actual interest. Whatever that forgiveness is, at least I get 100% of it. If I only bring back 75% of the hours by June 30th, I only get 75% of whatever I spent on those expenses during the 8 weeks. And the 30-day thing is what doesn't have anything to do with forgiveness. It simply allows, it gives us a different out. If we did reduce our payroll and lay people off within 30 days after the bill signing, then that means we don't have to have a full FTE the whole 8 weeks. We can use by the end of June 30th, we're back up to full power.
And folks, this is Ed Linderman. Ed has been on my board for many, many years. He's a mathematical genius and asks all the right questions. And I just want to ask the other panelists, do you agree with Ed? Is that right? And I think that makes sense. I mean, you don't necessarily need the whole thing forgiven because you're not spending the payroll, right? That's what you're saying, Ed. Is if I don't spend the, go ahead.
We have a target number, which is 3 times our rent, utility, and interest expenses. And that's our target number. We need to hit that number in payroll for 8 weeks in order to be able to have our expenses be 25% of the total forgiveness. That doesn't have anything to do with the amount of loan we have. We'll end up with quite a bit of money left that we'll be paying 1% on that we can use for either of those expenses within that same proportion in July and August, whenever we want to use it, or we can give it back and prepay our loan at some point. So yeah, we're not spending our entire amount of loan during the 8 weeks.
So Jed, Tom, agree, disagree, agree to disagree?
You know, I'd like to have Jed comment on the if there are some funds available or in that haven't been used in your loan, and or you have a amount that's not forgiven. I'm going to let Jed speak to how the bank will probably treat that.
As Ed touched on this with respect to any funds that are either, as Tom just said, not forgiven, or that you just decided not to spend for those allowable expenses, those will be put on a loan that has a maturity of 2 years from when the loan was first funded. I think the other important thing to keep in mind here, and we just had this clarified on the call previous to this call, is that there is a 6-month payment deferral allowed, which gives the borrower some relief for that first 6 months. And I know there's been some changes. Brad touched on this in terms of the interest rate. Started out at 4%, it went to 0.5%. It's been confirmed for us that the rate for the life, that 2-year life of these loans, would be 1%. The other item, I think this was mentioned, but I'll just reinforce, there's no prepayment penalty. So if you get to the end of this, you work with your banker, you get as much forgiven as you can, and you decide, I'm debt averse, I don't want to have any more loans, you can pay that back without any prepayment penalty, or you can keep it at that 1%.
Okay, so let's get on to some more questions. And my goodness, we have a lot. So Matt DeGregory, would you come on, because you've got a lot of questions, and I don't want to ask these questions if you feel like they've been answered. We had the FTE questions. Was that answered for you? Do you still have questions about that?
I'm trying to get on and something happened.
You're on.
Okay, I can't see my screen, so
You can't ask me the question?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out where I went wrong here. Okay, well, I don't know. I can't see. So I'm sorry, what was your question again?
So you had a question about in calculating FTEs. In a previous seminar you participated in, it stated that you needed to use 2 time frames and pick the best option. One
Yeah, so
6 months. Yeah.
The one that I participated this morning was one that was sent to me by my banker. And I don't know who it was, but they stated that the way to figure out your number of FTEs was to look at one of 2 different time frames. One was a 6-month period last year, and one was a 2-month period from January 1st to February 29th. And decide which one of those time frames you have the least amount of FTEs. But they didn't say how you figure out what the FTE is. Am I taking that whole 6-month or 2-month period and dividing what? How am I determining through a 6-month period the number of FTEs? So that was very unclear, and I don't even know if that's what people are using to calculate what that is. And they also were saying that they use the Affordable Care Act and use 30 hours a week as considering a full-time employee. So I'm just trying to get some sort of clarification on that, because it's just very confusing to a lot of people.
I'd like to punt this one to Brad or Antonia.
I can take it, and Brad, we'll see if he concurs or not. But what your bank told you, or whoever told you to use one of these 2 periods, is exactly what that's what it says to do. I mean, that's exactly what the guidance we've received, that you pick one of the 2 periods to then decide how you're going to which period you're going to use for your FTEs. So I would do the math on both. If you look at the spreadsheet that we delivered, you might be able to, I would do the math with one period A, thank you, Carol, and then do the math for period B and decide which one you have the better FTEs on. I don't know.
But how do what am I figuring? That's the part I don't understand. Do I take the total number of hours and divide it by the number of employees, or, you know, what am I doing with that 6-month period of information? Does that make sense?
Correct. So let me, I'm a better lawyer than I am mathematician, so I'll definitely
I'm horrible at both.
I do have the math figured out in here, and because I don't have it in my screen right now, I can, I'd have to go look at the calculation, how I did it in the Excel.
Showing line 34, 35 is average.
So is part of the problem here that we don't work with FTEs? I mean, as an industry, we don't call them full-time equivalents. So if you have somebody working 20 hours and somebody else working 20 hours, that's one person, one full-time equivalent.
Well, Carol, I think that a little bit of what you're talking about is the challenge. You know, when you get to cost accounting, they talk about FTEs, and you do all this accounting work, right? And it's FTEs, you know, MBAs, we talk about what's the FTE count, all this other stuff, right? But I think Ed hit it right, that it doesn't, it really, and he's right, it doesn't matter. As long as you're dividing by the total number of hours, and divided by 30 hours a week, or divided by 40 hours a week, as long as you use the same base, which Ed's 100% correct, you're gonna get to the same percentage number. So I would agree with Ed from a math standpoint, that you get to the same place. So if I had 10,000 hours that I worked, that we had people that worked in that 6-month period, and during that time, 40 hours a week would equal 1,000 hours. Okay, that means I have 10 FTEs. Okay, you know, so there was 1,000 hours available per person to work during that time. And so that I have 10 FTEs. It doesn't matter. So if the difference is now it's only 800 hours, well, then you have 11 FTEs. Well, as long as you compute it the same, like Ed was saying, he's 100% right. As long as you compute it now in the same time period, you get to the same number. So I think that we're hung up on the actual, what is an FTE? What does this person look like? You know, how good are they at serving food, right? That's not when, it's just using a mathematical base to determine the FTE count. So,
Brad, this is Tom. I want to get back to Matt's point. We went through a lot of gyrations to get to an FTE number for our PPP loan application. Is that now irrelevant? And now we're defaulting to this February 15th to June 30th, 2019, and or January, February this year?
Now, I'd love to know Antonio's take on this, but when you look at that form, it doesn't use the terminology that's in the law. It uses a word called jobs. I don't know. There's nothing in the law. There's nothing in the law in the CARES Act that uses the word jobs. It says we have 42 jobs. Well, that's not it. In the bill, it talks about FTEs, or it talks about employees. It doesn't talk about jobs. Is jobs different number of jobs? Do I say I have 3 different types of jobs? I've got a cook, I've got a busser, and I've got a waiter. Or is it the total number? Now, like I said, I'm being facetious with this comment, meaning that the number on the application to me is irrelevant, because it doesn't tie to anything in the law. It doesn't say anything. You look at Antonia's spreadsheet, there's nothing on there that says jobs. And so that number is just, to me, it's
better off doing this dollars.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, Antonia would, that's my legal take, right? Since I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ed.
I'm with you. I think at the end of the day, no matter what the calculation that you got to get your loan, the way I read this is at the end, you got to spend 75% of that loan, if we're talking about forgiveness, on payroll. So however you got to that number to determine your payroll, when you go do your math at the end of the day, 75% of that money had to go back to payroll.
Tom, to answer your question, you were qualified for your loan based on 2019 dollars spent,
right?
Not out, and everything to do with hours. When you're deciding whether or not you're going to reduce your forgiveness by paying less employees during the 8-week period, That's totally based on hours, and dollars don't count.
Got it.
All right. I'm going to go on to a couple of other questions. Everybody let that sink in. And did we ever get Workforce Solutions to tell us if employers will see higher rates next year as a result of claims made this year? We haven't had anything official from them. I have been talking to the Secretary of Workforce Solutions about this. They have said that no one employer is going to get hit with their claims particularly. So it's going to be spread over every employer in the fund, which is kind of what we were looking for anyway. To a degree, we'd still like forgiveness, and I know the department is looking for funds to come from the feds. but one thing we didn't want to do is have these hits hit us, our fund, and personally. So that is not going to happen. It's going to go across the whole fund. Still, it's going to be an expense, a huge expense. And so we're looking to help the department get those relief funds from the feds. And the other thing is that we need to make sure that if relief funds come into the state, they go to that fund, because there's a lot of other places that they could use those funds right now. Can we get the Workforce Department, can we let the Workforce Department know we're offered employment through the portal? What is the process? Can they get the $600 per week if we offer them work? So if you weren't here in the beginning, we had a discussion about a determination by the department. And the department says that if you offer suitable work and they refuse you, that's a voluntary resignation. And also that if you offer them suitable work, they come back, but they're not making what they would have on unemployment, that they will get the difference. So this is what they gave us, and it's what we have to go by right now.
Carol, I'll chime in on that. Basically, there is an email. There's an employer handbook on the Department of Workforce Solutions webpage. And in there's an email address where you can send the information. As of right now, I don't know if there's any online portal or kind of easy way to do this, but that email is on their website, and I'll make sure that I get it to Carol so she can get it out to her members as well.
Okay, so what I will do is put that on this page so that when you're looking at this is basically when you're asking your employees back, this is you have to give them a statement regarding the number of hours that they will be working, the pay, and the job duties. So that's what you're going to send to them. And then if they refuse the work, we'll have also on here the email of the person that you need to send that to. And Antonia, would it be good for them to just send a list of, here's the people we have offered work to?
That would be a good idea. And then the other thing, I want to be really clear. The department has said it needs to be a bona fide offer of employment. So make sure that you give the employee the job title, their rate of pay, and the hours they're going to be paid for. You don't just call your employees in writing. Don't just call your employees and say, come back next week. You need to make sure that you give them something in writing with that information. But that's all I have to add, Carol.
Okay, great. I have an employee that was laid off on March 20th due to lack of work, but at the same time, she had to take care of her 6 children, and then the schools were closed. She didn't qualify for any unemployment benefits. We just got funded through the PPP. I would like to know, would I be able to put her on payroll and then on sick leave?
The short answer to that is yes.
Yes, and yeah. So also on our website, what was that called? You guys remind me. The first relief fund, which was the sick leave fund.
Yeah, that was the coronavirus, the Family Protection Act, and so yeah, that's where it covered the payroll credits and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Family Protection Act. So that is on our website. I'll see if I can find it while we're talking. Next question. We had a manager break his arm mountain biking, clearly will be out for a month. Will we get punished for not paying him during the 8 weeks? Not COVID related, right?
Carol, I've not seen that on the chat. Can you repeat that question and I can take it?
Sure. We had a manager break his arm mountain biking, clearly will be out for a month. Will we get punished for not paying him during the 8 weeks?
So one, that person wouldn't have protection under what I call COVID-2, which is that Family Protection Act. The other thing is you can pay them if you want to pay them and you have a PPP loan, because sick leave is something that can be paid. The other piece of it is no, but employment law doesn't entirely go away. We don't know how things are going to be handled now with COVID, but essentially if you wouldn't otherwise pay employees, you don't have to pay him. But if you're paying other employees who are out un-COVID related, then you can't have disparate treatment.
Good. And so I also had that question yesterday from somebody who has 2 people out on maternity leave. And my answer was that you have to treat them the way you would have treated them if they were working for you. Is that correct?
That's correct, unless they have something from their physician saying that due to their heightened immunity, they're not able to work with the COVID stuff, and then I think the Family Act would come in.
Right. But that's something they have to elect, is they have to tell you that they have a COVID-related problem, including they don't have childcare. Is that right? Or can you tell them that they have this available to them?
I think it's incumbent on us to educate our employees if we want to do so. But I think that's just going to be a preference, how the business wants to handle it. No matter what, just there can't be disparate treatment. However you treat employee A, you have to treat employee B.
Yeah, Antonia, I'm so glad that you said that, because I've had so many people ask me, questions just like what you're talking about. And I'm with you. I'm like, no, there's still the laws. There's still ERISA. There are still non-discrimination factors. There's still all this employment law. This is not back to the Wild West here, okay? We still can't. I've had people constantly like, well, I'm going to set up a 401k just for me and not my employees. No, you can't do that, okay? I'm going to pay my health insurance and not my employees. No, let's not do that, okay? So it's not the Wild West anymore. And thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate it.
Okay, if we got the $10,000 advance from the disaster loan and the payroll protection, does that affect our PPP loan in some way? And do we have to spend it in a certain way?
It looks like Jed wants to help on that one, but yes, you are not qualified. $10,000 of your PPP will not be forgiven because you already got the grant. That's the first piece. The second piece of it is put them in separate accounts. You cannot use your EIDL loan for anything available to you under the PPP. That's my reading on it. I'll turn it over to Jed.
No, you nailed it, Antonio. That's exactly right.
Okay. See, these are good answers. I'm telling you, you won't get this anywhere else. Are non-payroll expenses limited to the same 8-week period? Brad, you're
Yes, I believe they are.
Okay. Do you have to hire all FTEs back at the beginning of the time period, or is there some magical time you have to hit that number? I think we kind of answered that, and basically that is, if you want the entire amount forgiven, which isn't absolutely necessary, then you have to hire people back in the beginning. But like Ed said, you can have a percentage of that that's forgiven, and then you still have the loan. Is that right, Jed?
No, I think the key is the June 30th. And again, I hate to keep coming with this answer, but there still needs to be clarification around this. From what I've read, if you want to look at it very technically, it is where you are as of June 30th. But I think you've got to run the math to make sure that that doesn't work to your disadvantage. If you wait till right at the end to ramp up, your ratios are going to actually work to your disadvantage. But again, that's one of the things that we want to get clarity on, so that it's not such a gray area. We want to have something that's more black and white.
Okay. Yes, so the question is, if you do not meet the 75%, can the loan be partially forgiven? Oh, I don't know the answer to that. Jed, that may be you too.
Can you repeat that, Carol?
If we do not meet the 75%, can the loan be partially forgiven?
Yes, the loan can be partially forgiven.
Okay.
And depending on what the expenses were for the payroll versus the other expenses, utilities, rent, it goes back to that 75-25% mix. Now, you can pay more in payroll. I mean, you could have a situation, I guess, where you get an abatement on rent, you don't have as much rent, maybe your utilities are down during that period, and you spend more on payroll, you can get more forgiven than the 75%. What can happen is the opposite of that, where you have more than 25% that's used for rent, utilities, interest on other loans.
Okay, and getting back, there was a question prior to this about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which I call the Sick Leave Act, and it was the First Relief Act. This is there's a poster that goes with this, and I'm having a hard time finding it, but this is the National Restaurant Association's guidance on that. And so if your employee comes to you and says, I have a COVID-related sickness, or somebody in my family does, this is the guidance that you use for that. So getting back to this, so we need all 45 of our employees back, even though they don't have enough work. Somebody take that.
I'll take that. I think, and I'd like Brad to chime in as well. I think the key here is, do you want loan forgiveness? So if you want the loan forgiven, the payroll, it's called Payroll Protection Program. The whole goal of this thing is to keep people employed and off of unemployment as much as possible. So if you want the loan forgiven, you're going to have to bring them back. If you don't have enough work, we had a phone call sometime back, Carol, where we talked about somebody who's going to have their employees clean their ranch. I don't know that under the law that's necessarily the best idea, but you know, you can have them do training, you can have them do cleaning, five in the building at a time or so forth. There's things they can do, but if you want the loan forgiven, now if you don't need to have that loan forgiven, you can do what Ed said, and you keep some portion of that after the 60 days as working capital going forward, but you do have to pay that back.
Yeah, Antonio, I'd agree with you on that one too. You know, I think it's also, you can repurpose some people. I've seen some people treat them as security guards, monitoring the areas. I've seen some clients have them go and since they're at home, they can do social media marketing for them. Like, you know, go out and do, I mean, just the things, and you know, I'm going to use air quotes here, right? And I'm in front of an attorney, right? But, you know, I think the end of the day, we need to make sure that, you know, we can keep paying these people. If they're sitting at home, you're going to have to, that's the only way that, if you don't have a job for them, you're going to pay them to sit at home as opposed to getting unemployment, so you can get the forgiveness.
Brad, this is Tom. I'd like to get clarification just for everybody, because we've kind of danced around this. To qualify for forgiveness, isn't it true that we have to at least reach 75% of payroll for the same period last year, or the period we used in an application? Can you speak to that real quick?
Are you asking me the question?
Either one of you.
So not to qualify for forgiveness, to qualify to have the loan fully forgiven, you have to hit that 75-25% benchmark based on either the period last year or the period this year.
Very
Now
good,
you can
thanks.
qualify for partial forgiveness, which is a different.
Right. I think we're all going to try to shoot for that 100% to the best we can. Last thing we need is another loan on our books that's dedicated to paying payroll that didn't do a whole lot for us.
Well, and I just want to mention something else, and this is beside the PPP. I think we are going to get open here in the next 20 days. And this has to do with momentum, getting your folks back, getting them on payroll. You know, are you going to be ready to open when we get that go ahead? So I think there's some reasons to be bringing people back on, even if you don't have work for them. The forgiveness is one thing, and then the momentum is kind of another. So this one says, read this right now, please. Nobody can hire staff back full-time, but we are required to pay them a full paycheck for 8 weeks. Is this not correct? Otherwise, there's no way anyone can hit the 75%. That is correct. You don't have to have the work for them. You're trying to get them off of unemployment onto your payroll. That was the reason that this was ever thought of by the legislature in the first place. So,
can I also?
Yes.
Carol, this is Tom. I think I know where this person is going with their question. You know, how do you get to this payroll number if you're trying to bring everybody back? They don't come back. You're trying to pay them at the levels they were being paid before you laid them off. It's going to be challenging. One thing I'm considering is some type of wage enhancement. We'll call it a COVID bonus, whatever you want to call it, that'll help me attract people to come back for the moment. But we call it a discretionary bonus. But that would certainly go away when we opened up, and folks would revert back to their previous payroll wages prior to the layoff.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Carol,
Go ahead.
Carol, can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Okay, the one that I'm really concerned about, one of them is the FICA employers and portion that is not deductible. Is the FUTA also going to be non-deductible? And I have a payroll company that does my payroll, and they will take out all of the taxes in one lump sum. Could I reverse the account and put the money back for the FICA and the FUTA back into the checking account?
My opinion is, as long as you can provide an audit trail for that, absolutely, I think.
Okay, that's one. Yeah, that's what I want to know. Yeah, I would write special checks for that. I'm having, I sent out a lot of letters to all my employees today certified, if they were going to come back to work. I'm having some of the people saying that, okay, that they don't want to come back until I'm open. Do I continue paying them then? And then some of the employees are saying they're just going to stay off until July 31st. Do I have to hold their jobs? I mean, that's impossible.
I'll take
No.
That's
Take
a fun
it.
one. You do not need to hold their jobs. People who do not want to come back to work, one, this is exactly what we talked about at the start of the call, that if they're saying, I'm going to stay out till July 30 because I get my extra $600, you have to notify Workforce Solutions that you offered them their job and they chose not to take it back, because that is going to affect their eligibility. This piece of that is you need to look at the, so they have to either come back or they're not eligible. But if they were earning maybe $400 a week, the way I read it, they're still going to be entitled to that $600 difference kick in from Workforce Solutions, but they still have to come back and they still have to report their wage.
Okay. Okay, I was really concerned because I'm having some people say that, but like, hey, we send out letters certified today and saying that if you are going to come back, and then we are paying them. I'm sending out the first payroll out by Monday, but I was really concerned about that if I had to hold them. I mean, they think that they hit the gold mine, the jackpot, and that's fine. But also, if they don't come back till July 3rd, can I stop their health insurance? Several of them are on the health plan, and it's very costly for me. But if they're not going to come back, I have no payroll deductions to really pay their health insurance.
I think, well, one, if they're not going to come back and they're going to be terminated off of payroll and terminated from your company, and you take them off the health insurance. The other piece of that, though, is definitely let Workforce Solutions know, because they can't voluntarily do that without repercussions, the way we read the guidance that we received yesterday.
Okay, because I've already paid 2 payrolls myself, because I was just waiting for this to come through, and that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you got to be super diligent on all of your Department of Workforce Solutions determination letters that are getting back. We've got a ton of those that we do payroll for our clients that are coming through, and you got to be super diligent on those as people are going. We actually had some for some clients that people were actually still employed, getting unemployment and applying for unemployment. Like they're still fully employed, like we're still paying them, and they're just trying to get their extra money. So it's a real unfortunate situation, Florence, that you're talking about. But I think you have to like what Antonio said, you got to terminate them, and then they can get their own health insurance.
So a question here, we took the total number of hours for 2019 and divided by 2080, which is a full-time equivalent. Hope that's one way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, 2080 is 52 weeks times 40 hours a week, and so that's what your base pay. Once again, as long as you do the same math on 40 hours a week, I think you're fine.
SBA was asking for a head count on the application. Is that different than the FTE equivalent? So that was a separate question. So
yeah,
head count
goes back to that jobs
thing. Yes,
versus,
I got it.
Versus an FTE. So.
So somebody says, hello, this 75% payroll needs to go out now over 8 weeks. Is that right? And that is right if you want the whole thing forgiven, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But remember, just like Ed said, and I think this is a good way to think about this loan, is that you can have some of this loan left over at the end if you haven't spent it all on payroll, that you can use for other things. It becomes a loan and not forgiven, but I think we're all getting wrapped up in this forgiveness. And part of the problem with that is that we are bringing people back and not working them. And then when we really need this, we're not going to have it available to us. And
Carol,
I would like to ask, it is 4:08. We will keep going on this for a while. If our panel can stay, if you have to leave, please do. And I think we have enough folks that are going to stay. The other thing is Allison, are you on, and have you heard anything from the governor?
Carol.
Or Candela, yeah.
Carol, this is Tom. One thing we need to consider in these computations is that only 75% of this loan has to be used for payroll.
Right.
So even though you borrowed 2.5 months of payroll, you're taking 25% of that away. So by paying everybody exactly what you were paying them for 8 weeks, you're going to run out of money if you use the 25% for other things.
Right, Tommy. So that's the math problem, right? So if you had exactly the same amount of employees and the exact same amount of payroll, and like just say you're consistent, it's always the same number, then you got your loan for 2.5, then if you spent that exact same number, that's 80% of the payroll. And so if you, yes, so you're right. If you spent 25% of it on other stuff, then yes, you would have theoretically run out of PPP funds. But if you have, so this was a challenge for the restaurant group. So a lot of my clients have the same number of employees now as they did before. So that's easy. That's the same number. They have 80% of their payroll is 80% of their loan is going to get covered up by payroll just because they're operating. And then so then there's only 20%, let's say it's actually left to pay for other things.
I have a question, and I don't know if it quite got answered. How do we deal with servers? Because I had a server contact our office and they said, my employer has offered me work at $9 an hour, and that's significantly less than what I was making when I was serving. So can employers bring those employees back using their calculations for their tips as well? And does that make sense?
Carol, this is Tom. Let me try this and then I'll pass it on to Antonia and Brad. That's a dilemma that we have to look at when we're rehiring folks back in advance, particularly our servers, our tip people. So what I did was I took a look at what my average tipped wage was for 2019, which was the benchmark I used for various calculations per the CARE Act, and determined that if I could get within 25% of that, which was the law dictated that as well, that would be a legal offer of employment back. So let's say, for instance, my servers averaged $18 an hour with tips and of course the tip credit. I needed to be within 25% of that in my offer to have them come back, which in this case was $15, $14, something like that. And I'll defer now to Brad and Antonia to make sure I got that right.
So I think your math is fine. I'll let Brad talk about that portion. The law, the final rule says that you can come up with the tipped wage or your good faith estimate of the tip wage. So if your good faith estimate is that they were at $9 an hour, then that's what you can offer back. The other thing is, if you offer them back at $9, they're still entitled to receive their unemployment benefit up to the unemployment benefit. I worked it out. I think it was $25 an hour is what they're going to receive if they're at the full wage of $467 plus the $600. So I would say offer them the $9, but they still have to certify with unemployment that they're receiving the $9 an hour, and then unemployment will pay the difference if they're entitled to more.
And I think, Antonio, it still goes back to like the willing employee. I mean, if you offer 9 and they say nope, not going to do it for 9, then that's I guess part of their choice, right?
Agreed.
And don't forget that you have to offer them at least the minimum wage where you are. So $9 may not be your minimum wage. So you do have to offer them at least the minimum wage.
Well, I want to just reiterate this. You got to be careful. For that wage to be considered forgivable, it needs to be within 25% of what they were making during the period that you evaluated.
So we have questions about paychecks. Could someone speak to how an employer should be crafting a paycheck right now when staff have extremely limited work? And I think we may have answered this. It seems nobody can bring back employees with other than scarce hours, which is true. And Brad, you answered that for them. Thank you. Going back to my employee question, when would I pay her as of 4/1 when the CARES Act came into effect? Or would I pay her as the date we got funded? And sorry, I don't have the beginning of that. It's way back there, sorry. A lot of these questions we will get answered. If there's somebody, I don't want to keep going for too long. If there's somebody that has a question that has not been answered in some way, shape, or form, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? And we'll go till 4:30. Anybody? Come on, you guys aren't shy. I know that for a fact.
Carol?
Hey, this is Rob. I have a quick question. Can we get partners from an SC to help offset that 75% wage?
Oh, yes, that is a big question. So can partners be paid? Can owners be paid out of this?
Okay, so yeah, so my piece is that if you're an S Corp, that's easy because you probably should have been drawing a salary anyways, right? And so you can compute part of your salary if you're an S Corp, and that qualifies under there. Now remember, you're limited from that standpoint as, to the $100,000 annualized, which is $8,333 a month. Now that same computation goes, meaning in a partnership, meaning if you're a partner in a partnership and you have income, then you can take your draw, and that draw is counted as some form of payroll. Now here's the issue, is that it has to be subject to self-employment tax. My concern, and Antonia, I don't know if they've answered this for you, but it's very clear that it says, hey, if you have self-employment tax and you're gonna do it, this counts as wages. So let's say that I'm a restaurant owner, I take my draw of $8,333 for 2 months and it counts towards payroll right now, but then because of this, my income's down, and let's say I made a nice expenditure, and now I have no SE because I have a huge amount of depreciation. I think it gets this little whipsaw, weird place to be, but the short answer is yes, you can pay yourself as a partner. It counts. It's pretty straightforward.
And my only advice on that, I agree with Brad entirely, is to don't take it as a draw. I would say put yourself on payroll just the same as everybody else. So when you run your payroll reports, you're there with your and so forth.
Okay.
So other questions? Unmute yourself if you would.
Hello, can you hear me? No?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, this is Sylvia, and I was just calling to see, I have 45 employees. Right now, I don't have enough work for 45 employees. So would I still be paying those people a paycheck, or do I just have them come in and just do random jobs inside the winery? And the rest, it's a winery restaurant, so.
Yes, so that's what you would do. You would either have them do random jobs or you would just pay them. So remember, again, this is trying to get them off of unemployment and back on your payroll. And we understand you don't have work right now. And I've got some bad news from the governor, but so what, you don't even have to work them. They can sit on their couch just like they were doing on unemployment, but you want them back on your payroll. So that's the answer to that.
Okay, so regardless. And what about the ones that choose not to come back? I've asked everybody just to bring me letters. And so what they did is they sent me letters giving me reasons why they don't want to come back to work. Well, I don't want to work because my mom thinks it's not safe. I don't want to come back to work because my grandma's too old. I don't want to come back to work because I have kids at home. So all three of those people, I still pay them anyway then? Antonia?
Well, so basically if you look at, I call it COVID-2, but the Families Act, the second bill passed under COVID, and they qualify and they don't want to come back to work. Yes, Carol just posted it. They qualify, then it gives you how many weeks you would have to pay them. The other part of this is now's not a bad time to weed out the bad fruit.
Okay, yeah, that was my last question was that. If there's people that I don't want here, then do I go ahead and just let them go and tell them just to apply for unemployment and be done? Because I'm not taking them back?
Yeah, if you don't want them back, now's a great time to say, reduction in force, COVID-19,
And there's enough restaurants right now that are closing permanently that I think we will have a good workforce, at least for the foreseeable future.
So just to follow up, just a quick follow-up on that. So do you have to hire the same employees back, or is it just reaching these thresholds that are laid out?
Just got to reach the threshold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if I don't hire all 45 then. I just need are we like the ones that have stayed here continuously since day one, they've never left. They said regardless of what they get paid, they didn't want to leave their job because they said they were scared they would lose it. Those people that stayed now, you can't give them a raise now, right? You would just have to pay them whatever they were getting paid before.
I'm not going to take that one. I think you can.
I think you can give them a wage.
Yeah.
I think they can get a raise. They can get a raise or a bonus. Yeah, I don't see that as a problem at all.
Okay. Yeah, that's because it just seems crazy to have to, you know, they've been working like animals. I mean, we painted the whole place, stained the whole place, everything. So they deserve more money versus the ones that literally stayed at home saying, I don't want to come to work. I just don't want to be there. It says we can be off till May. We're going to be off till May.
Well, and I think that goes back to Antonio's point of weeding out your workforce and deciding who really wants to work for you and who is just trying to get by. And,
free money, yeah.
And I think it's the time, and I've talked to a lot of my clients in restaurant industries or in whatever, is just reevaluate your entire business process and think of what are you really trying to do? You know, do you really have to have all these people, and does it really make that much difference, you know, in certain cases? I'm not saying that it is or isn't. I'm not a restaurant expert. I love food, but that doesn't make me a restaurant expert, right? But does it make sense when you start looking at your key people to relook at your business model or your business, how you're paying for compensation? Maybe you're good servers or you're good people that generate a whole bunch of revenue for you. You should pay them more. You know, I mean, that's what we would do in our business. I mean, in my business, if I got people that can handle clients and take stuff, they make more money. The people that just sit back and process information, they make less. So it's the same way.
Sylvia, this is Tom.
Brad.
Go ahead, Brad.
Question for Brad.
Go ahead, Don.
Okay. Can you just reinforce what is reimbursable with respect to payroll? Because I'm getting mixed messages here.
Okay. So I'll start with a couple things. One is that the example I used today when I was talking to Las Cruces Chamber is there's the concept of, you know, payroll is reimbursed, right? And then you've got the other expenses, which I'll talk about in a second. But you have payroll that gets reimbursed, which is the gross payroll of the employee. So let's say that you paid an employee $4,000. Inside of that $4,000 that you paid their gross wages, which would get reimbursed by the PPP loan, is their portion of their withholding, their portion of FICA, and their portion of Medicare. Okay, and so those funds you're gonna pay. I mean, that's not your money. You're gonna hold that for them, and you're gonna pay it into the government. Okay, now the part that is the employer's portion of FICA and all that, I believe is bore on you as the employer to pay.
But can that be paid with?
I don't think that it doesn't say payroll taxes or not. It doesn't say in the last stuff, unless Antonio, you've seen something different. The employer's portion of payroll taxes is not something you can use for PPP.
So Ed had a different piece of that. So Ed, are you still here? Ed Linderman?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. What is your take on the employer's portion of FICA and FUTA and all of that?
It's payable by the employer.
It's payable by the PPP loan?
No, the employer.
Okay.
The employer has to pay that.
Well, right. I mean, we always do, but and it's not forgiven in the PPP. Correct.
Okay. There was confusion about that based on the language, because originally in exact terms, the original language said that even the employee's withholding and the employee FICA would not be forgivable. But the subsequent guidance that came through on the question and answers modified that to mean that the employee portion is forgivable, just the employer is not.
Right. No, yeah, so you're 100% right, Ed. That's the way I read it too. So we still got to come up with cash to pay the employer's portion of the payroll taxes. Okay.
And it cannot be deferred, which is something that was stated elsewhere in the Act, but that deferral is only if you're not being forgiven.
Correct.
And then Carol, for whoever asked that question, in the supplement or the email that Carol sent out today, the newsletter, I specifically cite to section 2F of the rule, which says what is specifically payroll, which is salary, wages, commissions, or similar compensation, cash tips, payment for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, except where there's a credit under the FFCRA, allowance for separation or dismissal, payment for provisions of employee benefits consisting of group health coverage, premiums, and retirement, and state and local taxes. And then I go on with the next paragraph to tell you specifically what is excluded. So those things are out there, and that guidance is available for you to read.
So, and that's the, if you're looking at my screen, is that what's on the screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
And what page is that? Just.
It's at the top. What
Okay.
can be, yeah, it's at the
So
very.
state taxes would include SUTA, correct? State unemployment tax?
Yes, I believe SUTA is included. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not workers' comp?
No.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Carol, I've got a question about that definition, and I agree with that. We've been asking ourselves, does the payroll cost, which we understand to mean the same for determining the amount of the loan, is the same as we can use the same definition for forgiveness. So does that mean that I can actually pay while my employees are not working because we're not quite open yet? Can I pay their vacation that we have, that they're due, and have that forgiven? We're thinking yes, but I'd love to see the guidance on it.
I read that as yes, and the actual guidance is in the final interim rule, which I cite and what Carol has going out today. So I think you're pretty solid to pay out that vacation.
I'm unclear as to whether or not you can bring a portion of your employees back onto payroll. For example, if we're not going to be able to open for a month, are we able to bring a small portion back onto payroll and have that count as forgivable, and then later bring the majority back on? And if so, is it really okay to give raises to employees, for during that time period? Or I thought that what they were being paid had to be tied to what they were paid during the qualified time period you turned in in your application. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hey, this is Tom. Who's asking the question?
Sorry, Jennifer from Restaurant Martine in Santa Fe.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Tom Hutchinson. I'll tell you what I'm doing, and I've gotten a lot of direction from my accountant on this. I'm bringing back as many folks as I can bring back now in a meaningful way. I went ahead and adopted 5 weeks ago the takeout to go business model. I'm paying all those folks a little bit more than they would normally make, just so that they don't feel bad going home at night, and recognizing some of their peers are collecting $20 to $25 an hour on unemployment benefits. So that's how I'm handling that. To your point about the raise, I mentioned this point earlier. I'm calling it a discretionary bonus. I'm bringing some of these folks back at what they were making plus a little bit more, so that there's not this conflict in their thinking about staying on unemployment versus coming back to work. But I will be building my workforce over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to opening up. And so, yes, I'm bringing on some of them now, and I'm building that payroll and that FTE number until we open, which, I'm hopeful it's in the next 3 to 5 weeks.
So to clarify, payroll, even if you only have a portion of your former list of employees employed, that will be forgivable under the rules of the loan? You have not brought all of your employees back on.
That's correct. Right now, we're all in the business right now. We're a week into this PPP, at least I am. we're all in the process of building our payroll back up. We're inviting folks back to work. We're paying them what we need to pay them to get back to work. So this is a work in progress. Now, a week from now, we may have a different story. But yeah, I'm building my payroll and building my workforce to start to get open again. And we're certain thresholds we're trying to achieve that would allow more of the loan to be forgiven. But right now, it's bringing folks back and giving them meaningful work and at a wage that will be attractive to get them back.
Thank you.
Carol, I've got a question.
Okay, I'm going to make this the last question. I know we have more questions, and if you want to submit your questions to me, you can at executive@nmrestaurants.org, and I will ask one of our panelists to write back to you. So yes, last question.
Hi, this is Joe from WEX. So I have a question on the per employee amount of pay. I understand that that it's all based on $100,000, which in an 8-week period adds up to about little over $15,000 for at $100,000 threshold. So let's say I have a general manager who is in the $80,000 range, but part of this payroll, this 75% payroll was built upon that 2.5 times payroll. And if I'm going to give, we talk about discretionary bonuses. Am I only able to give $3,000 in bonus in that 8-week period, even though they may have made considerably more, because we generally give them out quarterly? So is that like a hard, fast rule of, or can that be annualized as well, that bonus? So let's say it's done once in this time frame, can that be annualized out over the year? Or like I said, is there a hard cap on the amount of payroll allocated to a specific or one employee? Because I have a couple people that fit into that specific category.
Tom, Antonia?
I actually think that's a Brad question because I don't have clear guidance on that.
And Brad's left the building.
I'm going to jump off real quick. I apologize. I do have a call here. That
you're here. Okay.
In a second. I'm actually getting it on my other screen as I'm queued up here. But I think that you have to watch out when you're doing the bonuses so you don't put these people over. And so I think that you've got to watch to make sure that you're not going to put them over a situation where they're going to make more than like what you talked about, the 16,000 in that 2-week time period, and it may not count. Like I said, I think that it goes to an accounting piece. Like I said, I've had a lot of clients ask questions just like that. They want to put their kids on and pay them $16,000, and it's like, no, let's lose a little common sense here, because you don't want to get in trouble. But I think the short answer is I think that during that time period, you can't go over that from a bonus standpoint.
Brad, what about paying them from a different account for their bonus and not out of your PPP account?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. I think that's 100% fine. But it's only the portion of their payroll, I think, that you get in that time period is computed. That's my opinion. I don't have that is strictly how we're handling it at our firm with people in relation to them.
Well, and I agree, but my only question and my only rebuttal to that would be is that what this loan was built on was those exact numbers, like the 2.5% time payroll. You know what I mean? So they don't make more than $100,000, but if they're only getting this bonus once every quarter, so it seems like it should be annualized as opposed. And obviously we have record in past to show that, because if you give someone a $5,000 bonus in January, and you add in their payroll, it makes it seem like they made $140,000 a year, but they won't get another bonus until April. So like I said, the math doesn't compute, and that's what this was actually based upon, was that amount, those amounts in a certain amount of time period, which built our payroll number up to a specific number. So that was just my question, I guess.
Yeah, sure, and I see exactly where you're coming from on that one. I just I think that you have your facts. As long as you're continuing to do what you're doing, you're probably going to be okay. I go with the whole, like, all right, if you were standing in front of Congress and you said, this is what I did, but then I go back to the potbelly pig example, right? Potbelly pig publicly traded company, got their $10 million PPP loan. In the ordinary course of their practice, they promoted a senior VP to an executive VP and increased his salary and gave him a $100,000 bonus. And it's unclear whether they actually used the PPP or not from it, but they got the huge backlash from everybody that they used this money to pay his bonus. So I know that that's, publicly traded company versus us, but I think that as long as there's a track record, you're probably going to be okay. And so, but I wanted to thank everybody. I'm sorry I do have to jump off. If you have questions, I threw my email on the chat box. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I don't know if Jed is still on.
Carol, you can look, the last question.
Yeah.
You can look on the COVID bill, the Senate bill, on page 12, and it describes annualizing the $100,000 and prorating it over the covered period. So he could, whatever he pays them you need to annualize it and then only be able to get forgiveness on prorated over the 8 weeks.
All right, Joe, you know
Okay.
me, Ed, you know me. If Joe, you want Ed to help you with that, email me and we'll get this back to you, because I feel like we need to close this up. I did want to let you guys know that the governor has extended the stay-at-home order till May 15th. She has formed a council of industry, but no associations, only individual business owners have been included in that. Brian Moore is the co-chair, and there's some other folks. Allison knows a couple of the folks who are on that, and so she's also forming a council of mayors. We are going to have a call on Friday, and part of that call is going to be how we're going to reopen. And I know, to me that's disappointing news, but I also talked to a friend of mine in Alaska, and her governor just decided to open as of today, and they have no way to do this. They're just not ready for it. Their supply chain isn't ready for it. A lot of things are not ready for it. So we need to use this time to get ready to do the right things. And so Friday's call will be about that, and also contacting the governor. So that's what we're going to do on Friday. If you guys have additional questions, please don't hesitate to email me, executive@nmrestaurants.org, and I will get your question to one of these folks. And we so appreciate it. Antonia, Tom, Jed, and Brad, really appreciate you being willing to do this. Again, even though some of these people are lawyers and accountants, please speak to your own lawyer or accountant on these things, because your situation might be a little bit different. And I understand the problem here is that none of our lawyers, accountants, and our bankers know what this is. And you've heard that today, is that there's different interpretations. Do your best to back up whatever you're doing. And again, that one account, just have one account to put your money, the PPP money in, and use it from there. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Yeah. See you on Friday.
Thanks, Carol.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Jed. Thanks.